Have you ever imagined walking into a fancy restaurant, not to eat, but to ask for someone else's leftovers? "Excuse me, sir. I was wondering, could I maybe take what's left on your plate?" Elena's voice trembled like the chill cutting through the thin blanket wrapped around her baby. She stood in front of a well-dressed man inside a luxurious restaurant in Manhattan. Her baby was sleeping in her arms, his little face red from the cold, his chin tucked against her chest. She wasn't begging, she just wanted to feed her child. But right then, even a crumb would have felt like a miracle. William Hart looked up, expecting someone annoying or out of place. But he froze. Not because of the interruption, but because of her eyes. They said it all: hunger, shame, exhaustion, but also bravery. So much of it. There was a quiet dignity about her that clashed with the fragile baby resting in her arms. This story will show you that even on the coldest nights, love can be born in the most unexpected places. So go ahead, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments. Do you believe a single gesture can change everything? Don't leave before the end. You'll see how one simple question changed the fate of a mother, a baby, and a lonely millionaire. It was a scene you wouldn't expect at a high-end dinner table. And yet, it felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years. That's exactly what Elena did. Wrapped in a thin blanket, holding her baby and carrying nothing but shame and hunger in her eyes, she approached a complete stranger. What she didn't know was that this man was a millionaire, and when he looked into her eyes, he didn't see poverty. He saw strength. And in that moment, when with no promises, no pity, something began to shift. Not just in her life, but in his. "Please sit down." Elena hesitated. No one had ever responded to her hardship with kindness. But this man didn't look away. On the contrary, he called the waiter, ordered a hot meal and some warm water for the baby. Elena, too tired to say no, slowly sat down. And there, between silver cutlery and linen napkins, her story began to change. It wasn't the food that filled her. It was the look in his eyes. A look that said, "I see you." For months, Elena had been invisible, to the system, to the city, to the people who rushed past her on crowded sidewalks. Now, someone saw her, and somehow that gave her breath again. "What's your baby's name?" "Ethan," she answered in a whisper, as if that name was the last bit of strength she had left. William glanced at the child and softly said, "He's lucky to have you." Elena lowered her eyes. She wasn't sure it was luck anymore. Maybe they were just surviving. As she slowly ate, silent tears fell down her face. The salt of them touched her food, a quiet blend of pain and gratitude. She shared her story, not looking for pity. She spoke of losing her job, bouncing between shelters, trying to protect Ethan from a world that was slowly breaking her. William listened without a word. Each sentence felt like a needle sinking into his skin. "You need a job, and a place to stay," he finally said. "You can start Monday at one of my restaurants. And tonight, you and Ethan will sleep somewhere safe. I'll make sure of it." Elena froze. She gasped, like air had turned solid in her lungs. Her life had been broken for so long, she no longer knew how to accept anything good. But in that moment, a miracle arrived. And with it, a story that would change 3 lives forever. There was a time when Elena wore white scrubs and soft sneakers, running from bed to bed, offering fragile smiles to fragile patients. She had worked as a nurse's assistant in a community hospital in the Bronx. She loved what she did. Caring for people was in her bones. But even the most beautiful calling doesn't pay rent when the bills start stacking up all at once. The collapse started quietly, like a leaky ceiling before the storm. First came the nausea, then the missed shifts for checkups, and finally, silence from the baby's father. He vanished right when she needed him most, just weeks before the birth, blocking her number, disappearing from her life as if Ethan had never existed. She tried to stay strong, even with an exhausted body and a broken heart. Going back to the hospital with a newborn meant juggling nursery hours with overnight shifts, but Ethan was fragile. Soon came the breathing issues, ER visits in the middle of the night, pediatric appointments. Every missed day at work felt like another nail in her job's coffin. Until one day, there were no more second chances. She was called into her supervisor's office. "Elena, you're dedicated, but we can't keep going like this. These patients need someone who's here." And just like that, her badge was taken, and the door clicked shut behind her. That sound echoed in her head for days. What followed was a string of heartbreaks. No income meant no rent for her tiny studio. She sold personal items, hunted for odd jobs, filled out applications at grocery stores and coffee shops. But no one wanted to hire a woman with a baby in her arms. Every door shut before she even had a chance to knock. Then came the eviction notice, folded like it was just another flyer. But to her, it was a sentence. Elena and Ethan ended up in a city shelter. Cold walls, thin mattresses, smells that clung to her clothes. Still, she sang softly to Ethan as she rocked him to sleep. Pretending everything was okay became her survival skill. But a shelter isn't a home. It's a waiting room, waiting for work, for help, for a miracle. And when the shelters were too full, they slept on the subway. Ethan curled in her arms, the two of them wrapped in that same thin blanket. She counted train stations like heartbeats, weak but steady. There was no comfort, only survival. Some nights, she stared up at the glowing windows of the skyscrapers and wondered how people were still laughing, eating, living, while she fought just to buy diapers. It was like living underwater, watching the world move at a pace she couldn't reach. And the hardest part wasn't the hunger. It wasn't the exhaustion. It was the fear of failing Ethan. She knew he deserved more. And every time he smiled, even without toys or food, a deep, cutting guilt wrapped around her. His sweetness only made it clearer just how unfair the world was being to them. That cold night she had already knocked on too many doors. None had opened. No one had answered. One last shot, asking for leftovers. With blistered feet and swollen eyes from holding back tears, Elena pushed open the door to a fancy restaurant, not knowing that this would be the moment her life began to change. Elena Scott was never the kind of woman who turned heads. She didn't wear makeup or designer clothes, but wherever she went, she carried a quiet kind of light. She was one of those rare people who truly listened without judging, who shook your hand firmly and asked, "Are you okay?" With her eyes, not just her words. Even when she was drained, she left a smile behind her. Her childhood was shaped by silence. After losing her parents at a young age, she was raised by strict grandparents. She learned early on how to swallow her tears, how not to ask for much, how to make do with almost nothing. And it was in that lack of affection that her empathy was born. She knew what it felt like to be completely alone in the world. Maybe that's why she chose to care for people. It was her way of stitching up the emptiness inside her. Before everything fell apart, Elena saw herself as just an ordinary woman. She worked, paid bills, dreamed of one day going to nursing school. Nothing fancy, just a stable life, maybe a small home with some plants out on the balcony. But all her plans were interrupted by 2 drugstore tests and 1 cowardly goodbye. She never regretted having Ethan. On the contrary, he became her purpose. Even on sleepless nights, even when she had no clue how she'd afford the next can of formula, she'd look at him and feel a love that made no logical sense. A love that held her upright, even when the world was doing everything it could to knock her down. That love kept her going. But that love also became her biggest fear, the fear of failing. She wasn't afraid of freezing to death. She was afraid Ethan would get sick because of her, afraid he'd grow up never knowing what safety felt like, what home meant, what a warm hug could do. Elena was made of steel and petals. She carried pain no one could see. And yet, whenever she saw someone more lost than her, she reached out a hand. In shelters, she shared the little she had. On subways, she gave up her seat even when her body ached. She didn't have much luck, but she had soul. She was the kind of woman who said thank you even to rejection. She didn't raise her voice, but her gaze was solid, shaped by every fall she'd survived. She had been betrayed, discarded, forgotten, but she never allowed herself to become bitter. On the hardest days, Elena scribbled down thoughts in a torn-up notebook. That's where she kept track of her tiny miracles. Ethan's smile, a free coffee from a stranger, a night of sleep without interruption. These little things kept her holding on, because despite everything, she still believed. One day, something would change. And even with all the scars, Elena still loved the world. She loved the fall leaves, the smell of fresh bread, the way Ethan laughed whenever she made a silly face. Without even knowing it, she was a walking poem, not just carrying a baby in her arms, but all the courage it takes to keep going when everything hurts. One of the first real hits came when Elena tried to apply for government assistance. She spent hours in line, holding Ethan, sweating in a building with no air circulation. When she finally got called up, the clerk told her her documents were incomplete. Come back another day. But she didn't have another day. She didn't even have subway fare to come back. In one of the shelters, someone stole her bag while she was showering with Ethan. Inside were her last few diapers and the little bit of cash she'd saved. That's the day she learned to sleep with her belongings tied to her body. From then on, trust became a luxury. Then there was the invisible judgment. When she entered stores to buy something small, suspicious eyes followed her. On the train, people avoided sitting near her, like poverty might be contagious. And even when she asked for help, she'd see the discomfort in people's faces. That hurry disguised as concern. Each job interview came with the same question. Do you have someone to watch your baby? Not yet. And just like that, the position vanished. In the job market, being a single mom translated to risk. One of her worst days was when Ethan got sick. High fever, labored breathing. She ran to the nearest public hospital, waited for hours on the floor, not even able to get clean drinking water. She was shaking. From the cold, the fear, the exhaustion. Who knew anymore? And still, she sang softly into Ethan's ear so he wouldn't panic. There were days she barely ate, just to leave enough for Ethan. She survived on old crackers and donated milk. Her body, once strong, started giving out. Her bones ached. But every time Ethan smiled, it was like fuel. A secret energy source that made her start again. And then, there was the loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being alone. The kind that comes from having no one to call. No mom to cry to. No friend to beg for help. No sibling to run out and grab a pack of diapers. It was just her. And yet somehow that made her more whole. Because in the end, she'd learned how to be the storm and the shelter all at once. The nights were long. Ethan, restless from the cold or hunger, would wake up sobbing. And Elena would rock him, whispering the same lullaby her own mother used to sing to her. It was the only emotional inheritance she had left. In the dark of the shelter, that soft voice was all that kept them together. A thread tying a shattered past to an uncertain future. Even on the good days, everything felt fragile. A shirt that tore, a missed bus, a rude cashier. Nothing huge, just the weight of 1,000 small falls that made her heart slip a little. But she'd take a deep breath, hold Ethan tighter, and keep walking. Always forward. Motherhood for Elena was a silent battlefield. No medals, no applause. Just dark circles, blistered hands, and the constant feeling that she was failing, even when she was giving everything she had. But quitting. Not once did that cross her mind, because quitting meant leaving Ethan at the mercy of the world. And that she could never do. Between one pain and the next, Elena was slowly building something precious. Emotional resilience. She started to realize she couldn't control the world, but she could control how she responded to it. And with every obstacle, she grew less fragile, more grounded, clearer, braver. She just didn't know it yet. But she was already becoming someone extraordinary. Enjoying the story? Then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Elena never wanted to live off charity. She repeated that to herself every single night, like a silent mantra. Even with Ethan in her arms, even starving, she still believed she could rebuild her life. So, between shelters, she started looking for small jobs around the neighborhood. Babysitting, cleaning, anything that wouldn't mind a mother with a baby in a sling. But most doors closed before she could even knock. One day she managed to clean a yoga studio. She got paid in a sandwich and $10. She returned to the shelter in a sweaty shirt, and Ethan smiling in her arms. It wasn't much, but that day, she felt unstoppable. For the first time in months, she came back with something, even if brief, that felt like victory. Motivated, she started writing down every place where she could ask for work. She walked miles with Ethan wrapped in a blanket, knocking on bakery doors, small stores, corner markets. Some laughed at her. Others didn't even stop to listen. But there were always one or two who showed a flicker of compassion, leaving behind a maybe. Those maybes became hope. She even printed a few resumes using her last coins. She knew nobody would call, but still, she tried. She practiced answers in front of the shelter's dirty mirror. Her smile was crooked, but it was hers. And even if she didn't convince anyone else, she kept trying to convince herself. In a moment of courage, she went to a job agency, waited over 3 hours to be seen. The woman skimmed her incomplete resume and shook her head. "You'll need someone to vouch for you. Without that, there's not much we can do." Elena thanked her, left, and cried in the nearest public restroom. But she didn't stop. She started sketching plans in an old notebook, ideas for selling fresh snacks on the street. She even drafted a simple menu, thought about making flyers. But she had no oven, no ingredients. And the cold was a silent, constant enemy. One day, she almost got hired at a 24-hour diner. The manager seemed to like her, but when she said she had no one to watch her son, he sighed and said, "You seem great, but this place is tough. You'd end up leaving the baby alone, and I can't let that happen." She walked out with a lump in her throat. With each no, Elena stumbled a little deeper inside herself. She started doubting, not the future, the present. Ethan needed care, and she needed a chance. But the world seemed to have forgotten she existed. Still, she kept waking up, and that alone felt like an act of rebellion. One morning, as she opened her eyes in the shelter, she felt a tightness in her chest. It wasn't physical, it was emotional. She was at the edge, about to lose the last piece of faith she'd held on to. But then Ethan touched her cheek with his warm little hand, and laughed with those bright eyes. And she knew. This wasn't the end. Not yet. That same day, she passed by a restaurant with gold lettering on the window. Heartwood. She stared at the glass facade, stomach aching, feet raw. She thought about walking past. But something inside her, maybe a fragment of faith, made her stop. And right there in the biting Manhattan cold with her soul bleeding, she made the hardest decision of her life. She stepped inside and asked for leftovers. She knew she might be humiliated, thrown out. It had happened before. But there was something stronger than fear. Need. So she pushed open the door, with Ethan in her arms, a racing heart, and frozen hands. Every step felt like a mountain. Every word was a leap into the dark. And it was in that abyss that she found a hand reaching back. William Hart was known for being strategic and cold. A businessman who built a restaurant empire with sharp instincts and tough decisions. He didn't smile out of politeness. He didn't do small talk outside boardrooms. But when he looked into Elena's eyes that night, something cracked. It wasn't pity. It was deeper than that. It was a reflection of pain, one he hadn't even realized he was carrying. As Elena ate slowly, never taking her eyes off her son, William sat silently watching. He couldn't ignore the way she wiped her mouth so carefully, the way she tried not to cry, just to avoid seeming weak. She wasn't asking for help. She just wanted to survive. And that dignity hit him harder than any motivational speech he'd ever heard. "Do you have a place to sleep tonight?" The words left his mouth before he could think. Elena paused. Her instinct was to lie, to avoid sounding like she wanted something. But the truth slipped out. "Tonight? I don't know yet." That's when William picked up his phone and called someone from his staff. There was no space for hesitation. He didn't even know why he was doing it. William had always moved by numbers, forecasts, profit margins. But in front of her, all those metrics collapsed. It was as if she'd tugged on some invisible thread inside him, And suddenly, everything that once felt important didn't. It felt small, almost meaningless. The next morning, Elena woke up in a small hotel room, warm, clean. There was milk for Ethan, a fresh change of clothes, and a handwritten note from William. "Meet me at 10 a.m. I want to offer you a chance," she cried. Not because she was safe, but because someone finally saw her as someone capable. At William's office, she was nervous, but he got straight to the point. He wanted to give her a job, a real opportunity. "You'll start as a kitchen assistant. It's not easy, but you'll learn, and I'll make sure there's a safe place for your son while you're working." She could barely believe it, not because of the job title, but because for the first time, someone actually believed in her. The following days felt surreal. Elena had lived in shelters and heard no more times than she could count. Now she had a uniform, a badge, a paycheck. William, on the other hand, started showing up more often at the restaurant where she worked. He said it was to monitor the new staff. But truthfully, he just wanted to see her, to watch how she bloomed after nearly withering. And she did bloom. Shy at first, but growing stronger every day. She picked up recipes fast, helped her coworkers, and during breaks she'd giggle with Ethan in her arms. William watched from a distance, coffee in hand, eyes quietly lost. It was like she lit up a corner of his life he didn't even know had gone dark. They started talking more. At first, strictly work. Then, small confessions. Elena admitted she used to write in a notebook when she was sad. William revealed he'd once been engaged, but called off the wedding last minute because he didn't trust anyone anymore. And in that quiet exchange of wounds, something tender was born. One day, Ethan crawled up to William. The baby reached out with both arms, asking to be held. William, unsure why, picked him up. And for the first time in forever, the world slowed down. That tiny body in his arms had the power to disarm the tallest walls. Elena noticed something different in William's eyes. It wasn't just compassion anymore. It was affection. An affection blooming slowly, like spring after a long winter. And she, though still cautious of fate, began to lower her guard. Not because she needed him, but because for the first time someone chose to stay, even after seeing every one of her scars. They didn't make grand declarations. No promises were exchanged. But their eyes, they said enough. In the small things, the hot coffee left waiting, the note that said, "You're doing great," the accidental brush of a hand. Love had begun to grow. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that's patient. Handmade. Like everything that truly matters. The calm that had started to settle into Elena's life felt far too fragile. Like the lightest breeze could blow it all apart. And that breeze came on a Wednesday afternoon, in the form of a brown envelope. She found it near the restaurant entrance, her name scribbled across it in rushed handwriting. Inside was a letter. From Ethan's father. It was short, cold. He said he wanted to get to know his son, that he was willing to negotiate shared custody. No apologies, no regret, just legal words, sharp and inflated with ego. Elena felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. It was like someone was trying to invade the life she'd only just begun to rebuild. She rushed to the bathroom, locked the door, and broke down. She wasn't crying out of fear of the man. She cried because of what he represented. Why now? Why when things had just started to fall into place? She was tired of being tested. Tired of having to prove day after day that she deserved to exist with dignity. And in that anger, a new kind of strength was born. At the end of her shift, William found her sitting on the stockroom floor, holding the letter. She didn't try to hide it. She just handed it to him. He read it. His jaw tightened. "Does he have a lawyer?" he asked. "I don't know, but I'm not handing my son to someone who disappeared when we needed him most." William looked at her, steady and certain. "You're not going through this alone." For the first time, Elena felt what it truly meant to have someone in her corner. Not someone helping out of pity, but out of commitment. That sentence flipped something inside her. It whispered, "You have someone now. Someone you can count on." The next day, with William's help, she met with a public defender. She brought every document she had: photos, doctor's notes, handwritten letters. She relived every abandonment, every ER visit, every night without food. Reopening those wounds hurt more than she expected, but it was also cathartic. She was finally screaming what she had swallowed for months. During the legal process, she had to miss a few shifts at work. She feared she might lose her job, but William never brought it up. Instead, he left a bouquet of quiet flowers on the kitchen counter with a note. "You're exactly where you need to be. Don't stop now." And in that moment, she understood something. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting. That night, alone with Ethan, she watched him sleep and whispered, "Mommy's not running anymore. Never again." And for the first time, she truly believed it. The woman who once begged for scraps now demanded respect. Not out of pride, but because she finally remembered her worth. Her turning point wasn't a scream. It was a silent decision. To stop accepting less. To stop lowering her head. Elena started walking differently, speaking with more intention. She didn't just want to survive anymore. She wanted to grow, to thrive, to leave something behind. Ethan would be raised not by pain, but by courage. She came back to work with new fire in her eyes. More grounded, more stable, more sure of herself. And William noticed. There was something about her now that not even poverty had been able to steal. Presence. That woman was finally whole. After the storm, Elena returned to the kitchen with a different kind of strength in her hands. She wasn't chopping vegetables. She was cutting through insecurity. Every soup she made tasted like a new beginning. Every plate she prepared carried the dignity she had reclaimed. It was like she was rebuilding her identity with a wooden spoon. And this time, no one was going to take it from her. The chef started to notice. She's got a real touch. She's sharp. And this sauce, that's hers. And little by little, they pulled her closer to the main stove. William, always watching from a quiet distance, already knew. Elena wasn't a potential anymore. She was power. At night, after putting Ethan to sleep, she studied. Old prep books, free videos, borrowed cookbooks. She scribbled recipes, tested flavor combinations using the few ingredients she had in the tiny room she now called home. Sometimes she'd fall asleep on the couch, textbooks open on her lap, dreaming of more than survival. She was dreaming of excellence. A year later, she got promoted. Chef de partie. More responsibility. More creativity. Elena cried when she signed the contract. Not because of the salary, but because for the first time she was signing her future. With her name. With recognition. With room to grow. Ethan grew strong. He laughed constantly, played with the restaurant staff, and ran through the halls like the world was his playground. Elena watched him, heart full, not just with love, but with peace. She had fought silent wars just to see that smile. And now, she could finally breathe without guilt. William remained by her side, but he never carried her. He offered the ladder, but she climbed every step herself. And maybe that's why their admiration ran so deep. It was never about dependency. It was about partnership, allegiance. One night, after a major restaurant event, Elena was called on stage to be honored. In front of a full crowd, she was handed flowers, applause, and a compliment she'd never forget. This woman reminds us that talent doesn't care about your zip code, and when you give someone a chance, you might receive far more than you give. She looked down at William in the front row, and his eyes were glowing. For the first time, she truly believed she belonged there. Her wins didn't stop. She was invited to create signature dishes for the new menu, entered a local food festival, and won Rising Star of the Year. And when people asked about her journey, she didn't shy away. She told it all. From the night she asked for leftovers, to the day she became the hero of her own story. Even with a packed schedule, she still made time to play with Ethan, tell bedtime stories, and jot down thoughts in her old notebook. But now, the pages weren't filled with pain. They held gratitude, the taste of quiet victories, the journey of someone who almost gave up, but didn't, and the love that bloomed from the cracks in a concrete city. A love that grew, day by day, between her and William. There was no grand proposal, no ring, no fireworks. Their story grew quietly, in exchanged smiles over pots, in shared silences, in deep, unspoken understanding. It was love, but love without urgency. Like a perfectly made dish. It takes time. It takes care. But when it's ready, it's worth every second. Elena looked back, and she no longer saw the girl from the shelters. She was now a woman, a mother, a professional, a writer of her own life. And if once she'd lived on the margins, now she stood center stage, not out of arrogance, but because she finally gave herself the space she had always deserved. And it all started with the courage to ask, and the courage to keep going. Help this channel grow. Like, comment, and subscribe. It was supposed to be just another Sunday lunch. William had closed the restaurant for a private event with international investors. Elena, now the head chef, prepared every dish with the kind of care that only comes when you're cooking feelings. Ethan ran between the empty tables while William couldn't take his eyes off her, but all it took was a single name to shake the calm. Thompson. The moment Elena heard it, her stomach twisted. One of the new investors was none other than Ethan's paternal uncle, the brother of the man who'd abandoned her while she was pregnant. He didn't recognize her at first, but when William proudly introduced her, the past barged in like a storm. Scott? Elena Scott? The voice was laced with confusion, and the look that followed, pure judgment. She froze, just for a second. The name, the tone, it was all too familiar. You're the girl from the Bronx, aren't you? The one my brother had a fling with? It felt like being stabbed with a polished thorn. All shine, no shame. William saw the color drain from Elena's face. She tried to hold it together, but the pain was visible. Not because she was ashamed, but because of the audacity of being reduced to that girl from a fling, as if everything she had built could vanish in seconds. William stepped in, firm and clear. Elena is my most talented chef, and the bravest woman I've ever met. If that bothers you, the door's right over there. The room fell silent. The investor scoffed, smug, and left, without signing a single deal. But the seed of discomfort had been planted. Later, alone with William, Elena broke down. So this is how it's always going to be? Every time I climb a step, someone reminds me where I came from? William took her hands tightly. You came from a hard place, but you're not that place. You are the path you've walked, and no one has the right to erase that. That night, Elena returned home with a heavy chest, but when she looked at Ethan sleeping, something lit up inside her. She realized she still carried pieces of the girl who once asked for permission to exist. And she understood, to truly grow, she needed more than space. She needed to own that space. No more shrinking. The next day, she asked William for something unexpected. I want to tell my story. At an event, a talk, it doesn't matter. I want to turn the pain into something that inspires. William, visibly moved, just nodded. He knew she was ready, not just to shine, but to illuminate. And so, the project Flavor and Strength was born, where she shared her journey, one dish and scar at a time, not to get pity, but to show that dignity isn't tied to a last name, and talent doesn't care about your past. People listened in silence, moved by the raw, radiant truth she carried. And William, always nearby, looked at her with the same wonder he felt that first night, the wonder of watching a woman turn pain into power. Then, one clear morning, the impossible happened. Ethan's father showed up at the restaurant door. Elena was in the kitchen preparing a special dish when she heard her name called at reception. The voice was familiar, cold, dripping with unfinished business. She turned slowly, heart pounding. And there he was, tailored suit, smug smile, as if nothing had happened. Can we talk? The words came easy, like time hadn't frozen between them. Elena almost laughed. But it wasn't out of sarcasm. It was disbelief. After everything he thought showing up would be enough. They sat in a private room away from staff and guests. He launched into a rehearsed monologue. that he regretted things, that he didn't know what to do back then, that he wanted to be part of Ethan's life. Elena listened in silence, not because she was unsure, but because she needed to hear it all, to never regret what she was about to say. And then she spoke. "You want to be part of his life now? After the nights in the cold, after the empty hospitals, after everything I faced alone with him?" He tried to interrupt, but she raised her hand. "You didn't see his eyes when he was sick. You didn't hear his first laugh. You didn't watch me bleed just to buy him milk. You're not a father. You're a ghost." Every word was a wound being cleansed. She wasn't swallowing unspoken pain anymore. He, caught off guard, tried to push legal terms, told her he had rights. But Elena wasn't the woman who used to run. "I have records, witnesses, doctor's notes. But more than that, I have my son, and he has me. We're not going anywhere." Her voice was steady, sharp as a blade. In that room, she finally conquered her fear. William walked in a few minutes later, not as a savior, but as a partner. "This conversation's over." The man walked out, ego bruised, no victory. And the door closed behind him with a lightness Elena never imagined possible. That night she didn't cry. Not out of sadness, but out of relief. It felt like a chain had snapped. Like she had finally closed the chapter that once held her hostage. Ethan slept peacefully, and so did she. In the days that followed, the restaurant flourished, but the real glow was in Elena's eyes. She walked taller, smiled deeper, and every dish that left her hands became a silent declaration. She had won, with integrity, with courage, with love. The final confrontation wasn't a war, it was an act of self-respect, and in that battle, Elena didn't destroy anyone. She simply saved herself. She chose to move forward, without carrying weights that weren't hers, and in that quiet, she found peace. Time passed, but Elena's light was never the same again. Now it was steady, grounded, and calm. She was no longer the woman constantly putting out invisible fires. She had become the one who created light. She led her team with empathy, taught techniques with generosity, and cared for the smallest details as if watering a delicate flower. Elena had become a reference point. The restaurant where she started as a kitchen assistant had become her creative home. Her signature dishes were now part of the menu. Customers didn't just want the food. They wanted to meet her, to know her story. She, humble as ever, would simply say, "Every recipe here was written with courage." Ethan grew up strong, sharp, and sweet. Even if he didn't understand the full story, he knew his mom was a warrior. He called William Will, and the bond between them was so natural, it felt like it had always been there. On weekends, they cooked together at home, an improvised trio that fit perfectly. Family isn't blood, it's choice. And they chose each other. Elena went back to school and finished her culinary degree. She was invited to speak at events, judged food competitions, and appeared on TV shows. But she never lost her grounding. She knew that everything she'd built came from the ground up, and no high heels would make her forget the soil beneath her feet. William changed too. The once rigid, reserved businessman had become lighter. He smiled with his eyes. He hugged without hesitation. He spoke about love the way one speaks about fine wine, with reverence and depth. Elena changed him, not by trying, but simply by being herself. They didn't need rings to know they belonged to each other. But one quiet evening, William held her hand and said, "You're my personal miracle, and I want to build the rest of my life with you." She smiled, without rushing to reply, because they were already building it. Their home was simple, full of plants, books, scattered toys. The kitchen walls were lined with Ethan's drawings and handwritten notes that read, "Today is a day to love slowly." The balcony had 2 chairs and a soft blanket, where they sat at night just to watch the world slow down. That's where the past finally healed. She still wrote in her old notebook. But now, the pages were filled with new stories, victories, lessons, flavors discovered. She didn't keep it for nostalgia. She kept it as a reminder of where she came from. And whenever someone said they didn't see a way out, she'd reply, "You just have to take one step, then another, and then one more." The shelter she once lived in now received baskets of meals from the restaurant. No names, no credit, just acts of kindness. Because Elena knew, dignity is something you plant in others too, and no one climbs alone. She climbed, but she made sure to leave the ladder behind. One sunny Sunday, Ethan asked, "Mom, are we happy?" She looked at him, then at William, then at the life around her, and answered with the calm of someone who had walked through chaos. "We are whole, sweetheart. And that's even better." Elena had become a symbol of hope. But more than that, she was living proof that even stories born in pain can change course. Not with magic, but with truth, courage, and love. She had become everything she once dreamed of. Free. Loved. And the author of her own story. Don't miss the ending. And make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Years later, Elena was invited to open a new restaurant location in Brooklyn. The very place where she once slept under an awning with Ethan. At the grand opening, she gave a short speech. She told the beginning of it all. "I once walked into a restaurant asking for leftovers, and today, I'm here to say, no one is born to live off scraps." The room fell silent. Then, a standing ovation. And in the crowd, a familiar face. The woman from the job agency who once turned her away. Elena recognized her, and afterward, she approached her. "You told me I needed someone to believe in me. I found them." She walked away. No bitterness, only the quiet dignity of someone who had won. William, now a minority partner, insisted Elena run the new location on her own. "You have your own light. I just want front row seats." And that's how he loved her. Not by trying to save her, not by taking up space, but by being her roots, while she learned to fly. That night, Ethan hugged her and whispered, "Mommy, we're a miracle, huh?" She smiled. Because yes, they were. Not a miracle in the magical sense, but in the kind that survives what was meant to destroy it, and still blooms. Not with applause, but with truth, and with love. Love born among pots and pans, scars, silences, and scraps. She had walked in asking for leftovers, and walked out with dignity, love, a home, and a brand new identity. A woman who never gave up. Elena Scott, who once cried quietly in a shelter, now taught the world that the hunger of the soul is healed with presence, compassion, and courage. And it all started with a whispered question. "Can I have your leftovers?" William didn't save Elena. She saved herself. He simply saw what no one else had the heart to notice. Two different worlds touched on a cold night, and never let go. Ethan, born in the middle of a storm, became the sun that guided her every step. Now he grew up surrounded by affection, laughter, stories, and a future. Life never went back to being easy, but it stopped being cruel. Because Elena had learned, the past doesn't define you, it teaches you. Every tear became a foundation, every rejection, a rung on the ladder, and every no she once heard now gave her the power to open doors for others. She turned her pain into a set table. At a special event, she launched a book about her journey. On the cover, a wooden spoon and a handwritten note. "You are worth more than they made you believe." People from across the country came to hear her speak. And among the tears and applause, a new generation started to believe again. The turning point wasn't the job, wasn't the romance. It was the moment Elena looked in the mirror and recognized herself. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a master of reinvention, and the love between her and William wasn't chance, it was earned. Because broken hearts know how to love deeply too. On the last page of her notebook, she left a message. "If one day you feel like giving up, read my story again. And remember, even an empty spoon can be filled again." It was her way of hugging someone still stuck in the storm. Because she knew exactly how much that hug could save. Have you ever helped someone like that? Or been helped when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. Your support helps this video reach someone who desperately needs a little hope today. See you in the next story. It may start with an empty plate. But with you here, it might just end full of light.